A Spanish territory's border was breached in northern Africa last week, but its impact is being felt across Europe. Italy suspended the Schengen agreement with Spain, France tightened its border, and EU member states are meeting on Tuesday for an emergency video conference. So I want to know, has the migrant crisis on Ceuta spooked Europe? And does irregular migration remain Europe's most divisive political issue? But first, a recap, then an update. Last week, Spain's territory of Ceuta looked like this. Nearly 60,000 mostly young men from Morocco arriving in a city of about 85,000. Many swimming around border barriers to get onto the beach. Spain said at least 72 migrants died getting to Ceuta. Now, Ceuta lies to the north of Morocco. It's a territory under Spanish control. It comes under Spain, but isn't part of Europe's Schengen border arrangement that allows free movement of people between European nations. So that was the recap. Now the update. Our special correspondent Nimisha Jaiswal is in Ceuta and joins me now for more. Nimisha, over the weekend, there were reports that a majority of migrants who had arrived in Ceuta have now gone back to Morocco. Is that what you're seeing as well? And what is the situation now?
Well, Paresh, given that that number was 50 to 60,000, it's fair to say that a majority have gone back. But even a small fraction of that means hundreds. And there are clearly hundreds who still remain on this beach. I'm hearing some chaos behind me. I'm not sure what's happening. But there may have been some food distributed behind me or something to that effect. But the people I was speaking to earlier were telling me that there has been no water, there's been no food. A lot of these people seem to be coming from sub-Saharan Africa. A lot of the Moroccan migrants who breached into Ceuta seem to have already headed back. And the people here, I spoke to a couple of people from Senegal, for example, they say that it's not worthwhile for them to leave, that they're willing to stay here for a year if that's how long it takes to get the attention of the reception centers here, to get an appointment with the reception centers here, which are currently completely at capacity. And from what I'm hearing and seeing right now, they're saying that they're struggling to find water, food. They cannot go to the shops here, which have finally started reopening, but they don't have the euros to buy from them. But they're determined to stick on because they say they have nothing to go home for.
So what is going to happen with them if they choose to remain?
Well, that's really unclear at this point, Paresh, because currently they seem to be at the mercy of the few Ceuta residents who come out once in a while with some food and water. So far, we haven't really seen that much, apart from what may be happening behind me right now. They are cordoned off right now into this beach area, and this is where they're staying. They were also telling me they don't feel particularly safe venturing into the city because some of them told me that they have faced violence from residents. There's a heavy police presence around here as well. And the police also does not share what the intentions is and what they plan to do with the people here. They are allowed to leave this area, but ever so often if somebody starts running, the security tries to intercept them. I know this is very medium and short-term situation, a situation that I'm describing to you right now, but that's all the information we have. It seems that perhaps the reception centers can make space eventually, at least that's the hope over here.
It's interesting you were saying that some residents of Ceuta occasionally come out and offer food to the people who are still there on the beach or in the territory. I mean, what does that say about how the residents of this territory have reacted? Because we are talking about a territory whose population is about 85,000 and about 60,000 came in over a space of 48 hours. Of course, a number of them have gone back. But what has been the reaction amongst residents of Ceuta?
Well, the reaction here is mixed, Paresh. The first reaction right after that Friday surge was that a lot of shops and restaurants closed down because they said they feared violence, they feared looting. It is important to point out here that we haven't seen that. All the people that we've spoken to here as well say that they would like to be able to access food and drink, but there's no force that has been used, no evidence of that. A lot of people said that it's a shame that these people were allowed to come through. They've criticized the Moroccan government, even the Spanish government. They're saying not enough is being done. But there are also others who are coming out to help people. There are some others who are saying that these people have a right to a livelihood and they should have been better protected by the Moroccan government as well and should be supported by the Spanish government. One thing that's really interesting, Biresh, is that there were right-wing groups and leaders coming out to Ceuta to make this has been a major talking point, as we've seen, and a lot of European leaders coming out and expressing concern. But a lot of Ceuta residents actually came together to push back against that protest, to tell these right-wing groups that they're not welcome here, that they're not welcome to politicize the situation here in Ceuta. Also important to point out that Ceuta is a very multicultural city in itself. It has a large Muslim population as well as a large Christian population, as well as pockets of Hindus and Jews. So there is a lot of tolerance in that sense, but there's also a lot of concern because residents have said there's only 85,000 of us. We don't have the room to accommodate 60,000.
And that was DW Special Correspondent Nimisha Jaiswal reporting there from Ceuta. Thanks so much. All right, let's get more on this from Gerald Knaus. He's a migration analyst and director of the European Stability Initiative think tank here in Berlin. Gerald, thanks for making the time. You're somebody who's worked on migration in Europe for a long time. Now, the crisis in Ceuta, it appears to be under control for the moment, but is the political crisis over migration just beginning in Europe, do you think?
Well, we are seeing something very paradoxical. On the one hand, over the last year, the number of people who have arrived as migrants irregularly in the European Union has fallen dramatically. Just in the last 6 months, the first half of this year, the number of people who came to Spain, to Greece, to Italy, all together from Africa and the Middle East, irregularly, a total of only 50,000. So nobody noticed. This didn't lead to great stories, headlines. What we noticed is one day, in one town in North Africa, the Spanish town of Ceuta, where suddenly in a day, in 24 hours, 50,000 people arrived. The same number that we've seen in the first half of this year. And that teaches us something about the importance of images. And images, pictures, always beat statistics when it comes to the public reception, which is a problem, it's a challenge, but it's a reality.
Okay, I do want to talk to you about the images and what they represent, but just in terms of what prompted so many thousands to suddenly show up in Ceuta over a course of 48 hours, what do you think it was?
Well, we know it wasn't anything structural. There's no change in Morocco's social situation. There's no change in Spanish migration policy. That's very important. Spain has had very few people cross in the last year and in this year so far. So what happened was the week before these 48 hours, where 1,500 people, already a big number, started based on rumors, based on internet campaigns. There was a lot of false information along the lines of Spain was opening its borders. There was an opportunity to get through. There were invitations issued in different social networks. And there also appears to have been no effort by the Moroccan authorities to stop people. So as people started reaching Ceuta, the news of people who made it inside that exclave started to spread. There was more disinformation. And then suddenly there was this explosive number of people in a very dangerous way, a very dangerous swim where we already know that probably at least 80, if not more, people have died.
Is there any culpability here for Moroccan authorities as well?
I think the key is to really have a thorough investigation. And it would be a good sign if Morocco is ready for that. An open investigation of how this was possible. In the past, we know, the last time something like this happened, it was instrumentalized by Morocco. 2021, 10,000 people came to Ceuta. And then it was clearly a protest against Spanish foreign policy. This time, we don't know. There are lots of rumors, lots of hints, lots of speculations. What we know is that if the Moroccan authorities want to stop people reaching Ceuta in such numbers, they could, and they haven't done it. But I wouldn't speculate. What we do know is that Europe remains vulnerable, and not just Spain. This could happen in the next months in Cyprus, in Italy, in Greece. What this has highlighted is Europeans don't have an answer to such a crisis that prevents it from even happening.
So what you're basically saying is the images that we saw coming out of Ceuta could potentially be the initial wave of another migrant crisis in Europe?
No, we have a political crisis. This is not comparable to 2015.
Okay.
In 2015, we had 10,000 people arrive every day for months on the Greek islands, but there was a massive Syrian refugee crisis behind it, and Turkey was the country with most refugees in the world. In this crisis, there were very, very few asylum seekers. Most of them were young Moroccan men. So no, this is not a sudden increase in structural pressure from a big displacement crisis.
Okay.
But what we see is that politically, even 2 days of an event in North Africa create fear in Finland and Denmark and Germany. And so clearly, all countries in Europe have an interest in helping the countries in the Mediterranean find a policy. And the policy has to be signaling clearly, don't do this. Don't climb across the fence. Don't take to the boats. Don't swim across the sea. Because when you do, we will treat you humanely, but we will return you. And if necessary, to a safe third country. And this is now possible, but we don't actually have such agreements at the moment.
There's so much to discuss here. Let's talk about those the lack of those agreements. I mean, you mentioned Turkey and the 2015 migrant crisis that was followed by the agreement between the EU and Turkey in 2016, an agreement that many view you as the architect of this refugee agreement, this migration agreement that was done with Turkey, in which Turkey had an important role to play to try and stem the flow of irregular migration into Europe. Is something like that the need of the hour, or does Europe lack mechanisms to try and prevent or to try and discourage irregular migration?
3 simple points. Yes, what we did with Turkey, which reduced arrivals within a few days to 3%. You know, you had 150,000 people in 3 months before that agreement in March. And then in the summer, when usually numbers are higher, you had less than 5,000. So dramatic reduction very quickly, because there was a cut-off date. There was a date, end of March, and there was a message. From now on, you will be sent back. And there were not many people sent back, but it was believed, and it reduced numbers quickly. This is what we need. But secondly, we need it not just with countries bordering Europe. It worked with Turkey for 4 years, and then Turkey broke it. Spain has good cooperation with Morocco, but then Morocco might decide one day not to control. Italy is dealing with Libya, but we saw a huge crisis a few years ago with boats from Tunisia and Libya arriving in Lampedusa. Being dependent on just one neighbor exposes the EU to vulnerability. So in addition to dealing with neighbors, we should find safe third countries. The rules are clear. There need to be access to credible asylum procedures. But we can now, and this is the third point, do this for the first time because EU law was changed. This summer, changes enter into force that allow the EU to negotiate with countries anywhere in Africa that meet the criteria to be ready and give them the incentives to want to do that, to say anybody who arrives in Europe from this date, the asylum procedure will take place here. And if you bind in UNHCR as the global guardian of the refugee protection system and the Refugee Convention, if they are supposed to check the quality of asylum, then European courts will agree too. And then we have a signal against irregular migration and against these extremely deadly attempts leading to thousands of deaths in recent years in the Mediterranean.
So what is stopping European nations from already implementing this agreement if you say it's been signed?
Well, there's no agreement. There's a legal possibility that allows us to negotiate. And your question is the right one. Why don't we negotiate? There are countries that would be willing to do that. The problem is that until 2 weeks ago, when I talked to European governments, I talked to ministers of interior in a number of countries asking this very same question. The feeling I got, the answers I got was, but the numbers are low. We don't have a crisis. The people who arrive in Spain or Italy or Greece, they don't go to the north of Europe anymore. And what the Ceuta crisis shows us this last week is how wrong this is. Yes, the numbers are low, but it doesn't matter. If you have one crisis anywhere at the border, the whole of Europe has a political fallout. Everybody is terrified. So German politicians, Austrian, Swedish, Finnish, all have an interest. And so, in fact, I hope that this week or this month, governments in Europe will say, we have these new rules. We have a crisis as a reminder that the status quo is not good enough.
Okay.
Let's finally, seriously and with focus, negotiate safe third country agreements.
You know, you're talking about this political fallout and the political crisis that Europe is facing, and I wanted you to sort of dwell on that a bit and maybe help us understand, because you had Italy, which, virtually blamed Spain for the visuals that were coming out of Ceuta, and then you had Giorgia Meloni basically suspending the Schengen agreement with Madrid. Just for the benefit of our viewers, here's what Giorgia Meloni tweeted, and we've translated this for the benefit of our viewers. She said, and I quote, "This is an extraordinary measure adopted to safeguard national security and prevent possible repercussions for our nation. The measure will be kept in force for only as long as it is necessary, with particular attention to limiting any impact on summer tourist flows." Gerald, can you help us understand what was behind this action from the Italians?
Well, it is on the face of it completely irrational. It is completely unwarranted. In the last 2 years, Spain had less irregular migration than Italy. Many more people arrived in Italy than in Spain. Such a crisis could happen in Italy at any moment. It's not the Italians who can prevent it, it's the Tunisians and the Libyans. Suspending Schengen between Spain and Italy is a completely bizarre measure. They don't have a border, so it's only for a few flights. It makes no sense in the high tourist season, and as Giorgia Meloni indicated, it shouldn't inconvenience travelers. It's pure populism. But I think to understand it, you must understand that on her right, there is a radical right party now in Italy that puts pressure on her. And so politicians everywhere in Europe, when they see these images which create fear, are looking for something to say, something to do that makes them look tough. And then they end up with theater politics that changes nothing, like in this case, divides the EU and ignores the most basic fact. Italy and Spain and Greece all have the same interest and the same vulnerability and the same solution, that they need to work together. And at the moment, blaming each other is a waste of political energy, and in this case, completely irrational.
I want to talk about Spain's response, because you had Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez, who slammed the reaction of some of the European member states to what was happening in Ceuta. And he wrote in a letter, and I quote, "In the current international context, the EU cannot afford this kind of selfish, polarizing and unlawful reaction," unquote. That's his reaction, but for argument's sake, doesn't Spain also shoulder a bit of the blame, given that the government of Pedro Sánchez had initiated a policy that basically regularized irregular migrants in the country? I think up to 1 million people applied for that scheme, didn't they?
Yes, but here again, Italy is doing something very similar. Hundreds of thousands of people are brought in or are already in the country and are regularized for the Italian labor market under Giorgia Meloni.
Okay.
And 1.6 million people were regularized under various Italian governments in the last 20 years. So what Spain is doing, what Italy is doing, it makes sense. These countries need labor. And it's not about, in the case of Spain, about Moroccans that are storming across the fence. There was a deadline. The program was announced in January. Nobody who arrives in Spain now will benefit from it. 90% of the beneficiaries, it was estimated, are from Latin America, which means they arrived visa-free regularly as tourists in Spain, then started to overstay and work. You have to have no criminal record, and you have to have been in the country for 5 months. And Pedro Sánchez then realized, as the Italian governments, including conservative Italian governments, have done in the past, it makes sense. If people are already here, already working, the churches, the trade unions, employers were pushing for it. But it has nothing to do with what we saw in Ceuta. In the last 6 months, after this was announced in January, the number of irregular migrants coming to Spain has fallen. So it wasn't a gradual build-up. It wasn't that there was suddenly a realization Spain is opening its doors. So this too, a very widespread criticism of the Spanish government. It's not ideological. The facts just don't support it.
So basically the factual position is that countries like Italy and Spain and other European nations require migrants, but at the same time, they are trying to crack down on irregular migration, and there should be a European-wide response to that. Is that the gist of what you're saying there?
Well, the gist is that controlling irregular migration, preventing dramatic images like this is an imperative for European politics, because otherwise the far right is going to use these images to create fear and push for irrational politics. At the same time, all European countries, once they have regulated and stopped irregular migration, and once they stop the death at sea, there's a humanitarian argument to do it as well, they need migrants. But this needs to be organized. So a combination where the key word that connects everything is control. People don't like losing control. And the experience in the last 10 years of European countries losing control very often at their borders, this experience has traumatized societies. Trauma is not rational, but it is there. And the way to deal with it is to show by action, by announcements, that this summer the European governments have learned their lesson. There will be control. They have the tools legally to do it. And they can promise their public that in 2027, once they have enough of these safe third country agreements, there will be no irregular migration, no new Ceutas, and no more deaths at sea. A zero death, zero arrival project for 2027 as a response to this experience. That would be the best, most constructive outcome.
EU ministers are meeting on Tuesday. I think it's a meeting over a video conference. It's an emergency meeting that was called after 22 EU nations wanted this meeting after seeing what happened in Ceuta last week. What do you expect will come out of that meeting? Will there be unity, as you say there should be, or will there be more recriminations?
Well, if you ask me what I hope for, it's not the same as what I expect. I would hope for a constructive debate on what to do to prevent this happening again, not just in Spain, everywhere. What is most likely is that there will be some grandstanding, that different governments will accuse each other. Spain will respond and will say it is not to blame, and there will be bad feelings and no solution. But the way out, I think, can be, and here Germany and others can play a key role. If Germany or Denmark or Sweden or France, put on the table a proposal to say, why don't we negotiate now an agreement, let's say with a country in East Africa, to stop crossings from Libya to Greece, and show to the public that this can work. Let's make something constructive. If anything like this comes out of such a meeting, then it would have been a healthy shock. If the only thing that comes out is recrimination and a silly debate on the future of Schengen, then it will be another wasted opportunity.
I mean, you mentioned France over there. France is one of the nations that tightened its border controls with Spain. The French government announcing that immediately after these visuals started coming out of Ceuta. And also, I think it's worth mentioning that Ceuta does not form part of the Schengen agreement. So just because you're in Ceuta doesn't naturally mean that you get free access to the rest of Europe. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong there. But then it just, to me, highlights the fact that there are, you were talking about the Italian response there, you were calling it a populist response earlier. There appear to be domestic constituents that need to be appeased. And I just wonder if those domestic considerations are far bigger than united European ones.
Very good point. And here is the problem. In the last 10 years, the response of governments, whenever there was such a crisis, was to do the one thing they felt that they had under their control. And that was, let's control our borders, the national borders. But they are doing so in a Schengen zone where there are no fences between Spain and France, or between France and Germany, or between Switzerland, which is in Schengen as well, and its neighbors. So in reality, these controls are theater. They don't stop anyone. We know because France introduced controls on the border with Italy in 2015, after terrorist attacks in Paris. And in the 4 years that followed, the number of asylum seekers in France doubled. The controls didn't reduce them, the number went up. And this isn't surprising if you go to these borders. You can control the cars on the road, you can control on some trains, but none of these countries has the border guard or the fences or the closed side routes from one country to the next to prevent people who really want to cross. So this whole debate, and this is the danger. Yes, politicians want to respond. There's pressure to respond. They need to do something. And then they do something that doesn't work until the next crisis. This creates a huge opportunity for the extremist parties, because what they are promising is, hey, let's blow up the system. Let's destroy Schengen. Let's build a fence between France and Germany. And let's get rid of the Refugee Convention, the right to asylum, the European Convention on Human Rights. Let's blow up everything we've created in terms of human rights legislation for refugees and in general after World War II. And if we don't provide credible, not theatrical responses in the center of politics that work, it's this far right that will, in the end, carry the day.
You were suggesting earlier, Gerald, that a credible response to this would be the third country asylum procedure. Can you elaborate a bit on how that would work, and would that be a joint European response, or would that be an individual nation response in which individual nations have agreements with third countries?
Well, the rules are European. They've been set down in EU law, including the standards that a safe third country needs to meet. So if you say that from now on anybody who arrives will have their asylum determination, the asylum case assessed in that country, there needs to be a credible system there. We know that because British judges looked at this in the case of Rwanda. And they didn't say you can't do it. They said you need to meet the standards. And Rwanda at that moment didn't meet the standards yet for asylum. So these things need to be solved. A group of countries, a small group, can go ahead. If Greece, Germany, Sweden, Denmark, Austria, the Netherlands, just 5, negotiate with a country that is ready in Africa, that from a cut-off date, anybody who crosses to Greece will be taken there. Then you define the 1st of October. You say, from now on, this will happen. I guarantee you, you will see the boats stop within 2 weeks. But one place where we can try this immediately is a very ironic place, which is the British Channel. Because while Europeans look at Africa and say, oh, the boats are coming from North Africa, boats are leaving Europe to go to the United Kingdom. 800 people, one day last week. And there too, the easiest way to stop this is not to send more and more French police to the beaches, but to say to the United Kingdom, after the 15th of August, anybody who crosses, send them back. In 2 weeks, nobody will cross because it's futile. This would be humane, it would stop losses of life, it would restore control. And in return, the United Kingdom could then take refugees who are in Europe in an organized way. So let's do this at all of Europe's borders, between European countries, with African partners, and always underline, this is a way to save the right to asylum, the Refugee Convention, to save lives, but to restore the control that our publics everywhere are demanding.
Always very informative talking to you. Gerald Knaus, the migration analyst and director of the European Stability Initiative think tank. Thanks so much.
I thank you. All the best.
So what do you guys think? Will migration continue to divide rather than unite Europe? And could something like what we saw on Ceuta happen again? Write in the comments and let us know. I'm Paresh Banerjee in Berlin. Thanks so much for watching.